For more than 30 years, American Bandstand helped shape pop culture in the United States. It started dance trends, introduced new acts, and made Dick Clark one of the biggest names in TV. It didn't skip a beat through rock and roll, soul, disco, or new wave. But at some point, the show that looked like it couldn't be stopped began to fall apart. It was pretty much forgotten by the time it was off the air for good. Most fans wouldn't guess that's why it ended the way it did. How Bandstand found the best host for the show. Before American Bandstand became a huge hit across the country, it started out much less fancy. In fact, the story began in 1945 on WPN, a radio station in Philadelphia, with a show called the 950 Club. It was easy to read. People would gather in a live studio and dance to records that were playing on the radio. At the same time, WFIL, an ABC station in Philadelphia, was showing TV Teen Club, a dance and talent show on Saturday nights. WFIL had a problem though. It didn't get very many viewers in the afternoon. The station had an idea. Why not make television show with the energy of the 950 Club? Bandstand first aired on the 7th of October 1952 at 3:30 p.m. time slot, presented by Bob Horn, a radio host on WFL. Senior executives at the station and local TV reviewers weren't sure at first if a show about dancing teens would do well. They were about to find out they were wrong. There were a lot of teens in Philadelphia, and many of them came straight from the city's different neighborhoods. They didn't just show up on their own. They brought a whole new vibe to daytime TV with their love of rhythm and blues music, dancing, and music videos. Live from Studio B at 46th and Market Streets, the 2.5-hour show was shown on WFIL Television Channel 6 through WFIL's regional network. Nearly 6 million people in the Delaware Valley watched the show. At the time, that area was the third biggest TV market in the country. Walls covered in pennants from high schools in the Philadelphia area were used to make the studio itself stand out as a local business. Also, the show was first just called Bandstand. In one of the show's early episodes, a young man from New York named Dick Clark worked as a TV announcer and spun records, paving the way for what would become the job of the video DJ. Things changed in July 1956. Bob Horn was caught for driving while drunk, which was made even stranger by the fact that his own station was looking into drunk driving at the same time. Since Horn dropped out of the picture all of a sudden, WFIL asked Dick Clark to host. Clark had shown up at just the right time. In the middle of the 1950 seconds, hit records didn't become national sensations right away. Most of the time, one city was built at a time. Independent record labels and record companies in cities like Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago hired local promotion guys to get their songs played on radio stations in small towns. For example, King Records in Cincinnati had 33 branch offices all over the country that helped them figure out which records were starting to do well in each market. The label could push a song to another city once it was getting a lot of airplay and sales in one city. A lot of things happened in Philadelphia. It was thought to be a major breakout market, which means that a record that went off there could possibly go off all over the country. And it worked both ways though. It's possible for songs that did well on smaller, independent labels in places like Cleveland or Minneapolis to end up in Philadelphia and start the cycle all over again. For Dick Clark, this was a chance that was much bigger than a local afternoon TV show. When he took over Bandstand for real in 1956, the show was already a big hit in the area. Clark had much bigger plans though. He saw that rock and roll was becoming more and more popular among teens and realized that TV could make the local music scene famous across the country. There was just one catch. Parents were scared of rock and roll. In the 1950 seconds, a lot of adults thought that the new music was a sign of rebellion, teen independence, and all the things they thought were changing about American culture. For Dick Clark to become the face of that music on TV, he needed something that Bob Horn never really had. Parents have full trust, and Clark looked like he was almost made for the job. At age 40, Bob Horn was older, bigger, and not nearly as polished as Clark was becoming as a television host. There was also a bad image for Horn among some of his co-workers. The teens who watched Bandstand really liked Clark and stayed very loyal to him, but Clark was different in almost every way. At first glance, he seemed clean-cut, polite, reliable, and very American. It wasn't a mistake that he took great care of his appearance. If parents were going to let their kids watch a TV show about rock and roll, he knew the man in front of it had to make them feel good. Clark became the safe face of a new sound that was dangerous. And it was easy to see the change when Bandstand finally made it to national television in 1957 as American Bandstand. How American Bandstand took over the world. On the 9th of July, 1956, Dick Clark took over as host of Bandstand. He had a tough job ahead of him. People already really liked the show, and the last host, Bob Horn, had a special bond with teenagers in Philadelphia. Clark had to show that he was ready for that job without losing the young fans who had made the show so popular in the first place. He mostly was able to do it. One noteworthy exception was Jerry Blov, who would later become a radio host and stayed loyal to Horn. But Clark quickly made the show his own. Horn had already put together a group of 12 teens to help keep the studio in order. Clark and producer Tony Mammarella took the idea further and made the rules even stricter. Girls should wear skirts or dresses that were not too revealing, and boys should wear coats, dress shirts, and ties. You couldn't wear pants, tight shirts, or clothes with low cuts. It was also against the rules to smoke, chew gum, and swear. Teenagers between the ages of 14 and 18 were the only ones who were allowed to dance. But, even with all those rules, the basic recipe stayed the same. Teenagers from the area crowded into Studio B and danced to the newest songs while visiting artists lip-synced to their new songs live on camera. It was a cheap TV set that worked really well nonetheless. Clark quickly turned out to be just what his sponsors wanted. He looked good, had a growing fan base of teens, and could get to Philadelphia, which was one of the biggest cities in the US at the time. More importantly, the show gave sponsors a direct way to reach the teenage market, which was thought to be worth billions of dollars and was growing very quickly. That chance could no longer be ignored by ABC. Clark worked hard to get Bandstand on the network in 1957, when they were looking for something to show in the afternoon. ABC agreed, and on the 5th of August, 1957, the show went national with the name American Bandstand. Several features that would become closely linked to the program were added to the national version. The studio was remodeled to look like a high school gym, complete with benches. Teenagers were able to rate new songs, and their scores helped make one of the show's most important traditions. This song had a strong beat and was easy for young dancers to move to. Clark played records while cameras followed teens around the dance floor on the first season of American Bandstand, which was seen all over the country. Many times in each episode, singers and groups showed up to perform or lip-sync to the newest hits. The answer came right away. A young Paul Anka made his national TV debut on the show with Diana just 2 days after the national launch. In just 6 months, 101 stations picked up American Bandstand, which was seen by about 20 million people. It was a surprise that about half of those watchers were adults. The show's popularity led to another big event. Every week, tens of thousands of letters from fans came in, and teens from all over the country came to Philadelphia to try to get on cam. Outside the school, there were always long lines of young people that went all the way around the block, but it wasn't easy just getting inside. The teens also had to look a certain way that Clark thought was right. The dress code was about more than just how you looked. Clark knew that a lot of older Americans were still scared of rock and roll. Some adults saw the teens dancing to the music as a sign that social norms were changing, because the music had a reputation for being rebellious. Clark helped make the music feel less scary by putting the artists and dancers in a clean, classy space. As a result, American Band became a key link between the culture of teens and the rest of America. Teenagers and the radio were no longer the only places where families heard about rock and roll. It showed up out of nowhere in their homes every afternoon. Presented by a host with clean hair and a group of young people who are also nicely dressed. It was the teens themselves who made it interesting. Clark and Mamarella put together a group called the Committee that helped keep the studio rules in place and decided who could go on the floor. A lot of the people who joined came from South Philadelphia or areas close to the studio. They quickly became well known, with pictures of them in magazines, fan mail, and dress trends for teens. The show's relationship with race, on the other hand, was not nearly as simple. Millions of people saw black players on American Bandstand, but the studio floor was mostly white in the show's early years. Teenagers of color were said to be prevented from appearing as dancers because of unfair rules, possibly due to pressure from conservative advertisers. At the same time, the show brought famous black artists to the attention of people all over the country, such as Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and Sam Cooke. After that, artists like Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, Mary Wells, Smokey Robinson, and the Miracles came out. In this way, the show could make the studio more segregated while also bringing black music into the homes of millions of Americans. Clark also grew to be one of the most important people in the music business. Many artists, especially a group of young white pop stars from the Philadelphia area, got their start or built up their careers with his show. Teen idols Frankie Avalon, Bobby Riel, and Fabian all became big stars. Connie Francis got a lot of attention after she went on the show with her big hit. It was very strange to see Fabian rise to power. Clark liked songs most of the time that were already big hits in big local markets. Fabian was not like that, though. His best quality wasn't his voice. It was the way he looked. There was something about his looks that could make teens go crazy. Record producers put in a lot of work to make recordings that fit his picture. Later, Fabian admitted that the finished tapes didn't sound much like his real voice, but TV took care of the rest. He could go on camera, lip-sync, and move with confidence, and fans would start screaming right away. People didn't like that approach. Some people thought that American Bandstand's white teen heroes were too polished and harmless versions of rock and roll, but that summary left out a big part of what the show was really like. American Bandstand had R&B groups, rockabilly artists, country stars, Motown artists, and some of the biggest soul musicians of the time, as well as teen idols. A lot of different kinds of songs were made by people like Brenda Lee, Johnny Cash, Conway Twitty, Patti Cline, The Sherrills, Mary Wells, Smokey Robinson, Marvin Gaye, and James Brown. For example, in October 1957, the show was so popular that ABC added a Monday night primetime edition as an experiment. Clark told the producers that the show's main viewers, teenagers and housewives, might not be available at night. The warning turned out to be right. The version that aired during primetime didn't do well, and American Bandstand quickly went back to its successful afternoon program. As of February 1958, the show was getting about 8.4 million viewers every day, making it ABC's most popular show. It became the most watched daytime show on every American network by the end of the decade. But the biggest change in culture was still to come. It was planned for Hank Ballard and the Midnighters to perform their hit song The Twist on the show on the 6th of August 1960, but they didn't show up. The performance was in danger, so Clark called Chubby Checker. Checker quickly recorded his own version of the song. It was said that Checker finished the recording in 30 minutes. Then he went on American Bandstand and showed how to do the dance that will soon be impossible to avoid. The Twist blew up. What started out as a last-minute TV idea turned into a worldwide dance sensation that changed American Bandstand again. Then, in 1960, the huge polio scandal hit the music business. It revealed a secret system in which record companies paid radio DJs to play certain songs more often. People used to think of this part of the music business as quiet, but now it's getting a lot of attention across the country. The most important thing was American Band and its very strong host, Dick Clark. The secret that almost brought down Bandstand. It helps to remember that American Bandstand started airing on ABC across the country in 1957. This will help you understand why the scandal got so bad. The show changed how music was promoted almost overnight. Before that, record companies and artists had to go from city to city, sending performers on endless tours and trying to get local radio stations to play their songs. But American Bandstand had something much stronger to give. A song could quickly reach millions of teens just by being played on the show or on the radio all the time. Record companies quickly learned how much that kind of attention was worth. They were desperate to get their artists on the show, and some distributors started paying back the show in secret for the money it paid musicians to perform. Clark later defended this deal as a reasonable way to deal with the high cost of booking artists, saying it wasn't illegal or moral. But there was another, much less clear practice going on behind those plans. In exchange for getting certain records played, record companies gave DJs money, gifts, consulting fees, and even rights to write or print songs. It was called poliola. There was nothing new about the idea itself. It came from the old practice of song plugging, in which record companies paid people to help get their songs heard. What changed was how quickly rock and roll and R&B grew. In an election year, politicians saw the music business as another easy target, because teen music was becoming such a big part of culture. At first, the investigation was mostly about rigged TV quiz shows, but lawmakers soon started to look into whether the record business was tricking people. Also going on behind the scenes was a strong competition in the business. An organization that licenses music called BMI was in a bitter fight with ASCAP. ASCAP asked politicians to look into why music licensed by BMI was becoming more and more popular. While media critic Vance Packard was hired to say that rock and roll, hillbilly, and Latin music were being pushed and manipulated in a dishonest way. The media also made the record business look like it was very hard to predict. There were hundreds of small, independent labels popping up, and many of them were making records in the hopes that one would quickly become a hit. The committee investigation had to deal with a tough question. Thousands of records were all vying for their attention. Where did honest music promotion end and dishonesty begin? Dick Clark was, of course, one of the main targets of the investigation. Clark was different from every other DJ in America at this point. He became one of the most important people in popular music after American Bandstand brought him fans all over the country. Investigators found that he had financial ties to 33 music-related businesses and owned the rights to 160 songs, with 143 of those allegedly being gifts to him. People in the music business who were there said they gave Clark copyrights and consultant fees because they wanted American Bandstand to play their songs more. Clark maintained that he had never agreed to work with poliola. His argument was based on a very narrow understanding of the practice. Poliola, in his view, meant a direct agreement in which someone was paid to play a certain record. He said that his business relationships did not qualify because there was no clear cash for airplane deal. Robert Lishman, the subcommittee's chief attorney, was not nearly as sure. He thought Clark was using complicated words to hide the fact that he was making money in the music business without admitting that his financial interests could affect the show. Clark then showed what seemed to be his most important piece of evidence. He hired Compu2C, a big data processing company in New York, to look at the playlists of American bands. The study looked at how often Clark-related records were played and how often other records were played on the show. It looked like the ending was good. Clark didn't seem to treat his own records better than other records. But after many years, Clark said that the work had been somewhat of a distraction. He had lavished $6,000 on what he called a huge distraction meant to draw attention away from the real problem. And scholar John Jackson later said that his calculations showed that it worked. More than half of the records made by companies connected to Clark had been on American Band. Many of these records never made it to the Billboard Top 100. At that point, the real question wasn't whether Clark had personally told a song to become a hit. It was about whether his business interests were getting an unusually large amount of attention. There was another thing that the hearings showed. A lot of politicians just didn't get or understand the teenage music market. People asked why American Bandstand wasn't supporting well-known artists like Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, and Perry Coe instead of up-and-coming young artists. Clark's answer was basically that the people who were listening wanted something different. That debate had become a big part of how people saw him. Clark didn't try to start musical trends. Instead, he wanted to show that he knew what teens already wanted. His defense was easy. This show called American Bandstand was made for its viewers who wanted rock and roll, R&B, and new performers. That plan helped Clark get through the scandal. Even though there was proof about his business dealings, the investigation never got rid of him. Because he owed money to record labels and song publishing companies, he had to sell them, but that was the end of the effects. One big reason was that he had support from important people at ABC. Leonard Golden, the president of the network, and Walter Annenberg, the head of media, had too much involved in American Bandstand to just give up on its star. As the scandal grew, they stood by Clark and helped fix his public image. ABC also made its music workers sign an affidavit saying they had never worked for a record company or accepted Poliola. That showed a problem right away. American Bandstand director Tony Mamarella said he took money from record companies and quit rather than give it up. Even worse things were going on for radio legend Alan Freary did. He wouldn't sign the affidavit because he knew that lying about how his role could be considered perjury. Clark, on the other hand, got special treatment. He was able to make his own affidavit with a much narrower meaning of Poliola from ABC. In exchange, he agreed to give up his financial stakes in several music-related businesses. The network kept defending him in public. Clark's critics were ignored, but the difference was clear. The study hurt the careers of many well-known DJs, such as Alan Freary did, Tommy Smalls, Jack Walker, Hal Jackson, George Oxford, Tom Clay, and Joe Smith. Many people just didn't have the strong, institutional support that Clark did. The best thing about American Bandstand turned out to be Clark's shield in the end. He was one of the investigation's main targets because of how popular the show was, but ABC couldn't give him up because of that. The Piola affair showed how deeply money and power had gotten tangled up with promoting music. But while many DJs saw their jobs fall apart, Dick Clark came out of it hurt but still standing. Clark and American Band both made it through, and the teens who watched them make them famous kept watching. But just as it looked like American Bandstand would never end, a big change was on the way. The show that made American Bandstand stop airing. The show only aired on Saturdays, after the 7th of September, 1963. It used to air every day during the week. The real reason for the drop began about a month earlier when ABC changed the show from its normal weekday afternoon time slot to Saturday afternoons. Making that choice caused a big problem. American Bandstand relied on local TV stations a lot, and a lot of those stations were sick of giving up valuable weekday airtime. After they stopped airing the show, fewer people watched. Dick Clark later said that things got worse and worse until they were unstoppable. Local stations could get the time back and use it to show their own shows, keeping all the money they made from ads. American Bandstand reached fewer homes as more stations did that, and its ratings went down. This made even more stations want to drop it. Clark wasn't the type to do nothing while his job fell apart, though. Since ABC was cutting back on American Bandstand, he began looking for other work. By the end of 1963, his search had led him to California, where he got a job as a host on a game show called The Object Is. It didn't last long on the game show, but moving to California changed everything. By February 1964, Clark had moved American Bandstand from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. This was just as the surf rock scene in California was starting to take off. The match worked out pretty well. The Beach Boys and other bands were already making the West Coast a hub for American pop music, so it made perfect sense to move the show there. And Clark was about to have one of the best times of his career. Standing behind a turntable and playing records wasn't enough for him anymore. Live performers were added to American Bandstand more and more. This gave artists a chance to perform in front of millions of people and kept the show relevant to the music scene, which is changing quickly. While American Band wasn't the only variety show on TV, it did have something that made it stand out from many of its rivals. Clark was ready to accept rock and roll instead of seeing it as a threat. That made him a target. Some religious groups didn't like the music. Politicians were upset about how it affected teens. Clark was pushing a new rock and roll culture, but even famous people like Frank Sinatra didn't always like it. But it didn't seem to bother him. And now that we look back, the results are clear. A lot of the artists who played on American Bandstand made it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the end. Clark built something much bigger than a TV job with the help of the show's success. He built a media empire around his name by making variety shows, starting a big awards show, opening a chain of themed restaurants, and eventually taking over as head of Dick Clark Productions. Clark was only 35 years old when he was said to be making about $1 million a year in 1965. And American Bandstand wasn't going to stop. For several years after that, the show kept bringing in performers who were on the verge of becoming famous. Sonny and Cher came out in June 1965, and Neil Diamond came out in June 1966. The Fifth Dimension played their pop soul music on the show that same year, and the Doors did the same in July 1967. Then, after only 2 months, there was another big change. That year, American Bandstand was shown in color for the first time. This gave the show a new look as TV moved into a new era. Another group of stars came out in the 1970s. The Jackson 5 sang I Want You Back on American Bandstand on the 21st of February 1970. They also played ABC, while Michael Jackson, then a young man, did his first TV interview. After only a year, Michael came back for his first appearance by himself, singing Rock and Robin. At that point, American Bandstand wasn't just a show about popular music. It was helping to describe it. The show had a great mix of old and new guests. When it celebrated its 20th anniversary in 1973, the Raiders, Little Richard, and Paul Revere. They were joined by many other acts, such as Johnny Mathis, Three Dog Night, Annette Funicello, Cheech and Chong, and many more. It was kind of like seeing different generations of American entertainers meet on one stage. After 4 years, the 25th anniversary special made things even more important. A lot of artists like Chuck Berry, Seals and Crofts, Greg Allman, Junior Walker, Johnny Rivers, the Pointer Sisters, Charlie Daniels, and more came to the party. At the end of the night, Clark's famous All-Star Rock Jam brought the whole band together for a huge performance of Roll Over Beethoven. However, American Bandstand didn't just get by looking backward. It was still up to date with what was going on in pop culture. In the late 1970s, disco became very popular, and the show cashed in on the craze by having Donna Summer co-host a big disco special to promote her movie, I'm Glad It's Friday. Next came one of the most surprising things the show did for pop culture. In 1979, Clark helped show the crowd a simple set of moves during a performance by the Village People's YMCA. People started dancing to the 4 letters, and soon they were one of the most famous dance moves in the world. Even though it's been done for decades, the routine is still being used in school gyms. But things were changing again in the world of TV. The numbers for American Bandstands were going down a lot by the 1980s. When MTV came out in 1981, it changed the way young people found music. When college football games were deregulated in 1984, it created a different problem. A lot of ABC affiliates started showing college football instead of American Bandstand, which took away even more viewers. After being on ABC for more than 30 years, American Bandstand finally finished its legendary run in 1987. The show ran in syndication for 2 more seasons, but Clark quit as host in the end. After that, the show moved to the USA Network for one last season with a different host. The last episode of American Bandstand aired on the 7th of October, 1989, exactly 37 years after the first show aired. In the end, the show was supposed to come back for the 2005 television season. But those plans were put on hold when Clark had a serious stroke in December 2004. One of American Bandstand's most famous ideas had already taken off on its own, which was interesting. The dance competition concept of the show led to the creation of the hit TV show So You Think You Can Dance? The stage where it all began was no longer the only place Dick Clark's impact could be felt. He finally gave Ryan Saris the job of hosting his famous New Year's special. But Clark kept making appearances here and there so people could see the man who had shaped American pop culture for decades. Then, Dick Clark died in 2012 of a heart attack after having surgery on his prostate. He was 82 years old.